Welcome to the Hauntline. Tonight, we delve into the fragile architecture of the human mind, where memories can be corrupted and the ink of the past can bleed into the present with terrifying consequences. Settle in and try not to look over your shoulder. We're about to open a file that should have remained buried. Dr. Alistair Finch was a man tethered to routine, a cartographer of troubled minds. For 40 years, he'd navigated the labyrinthine corridors of psychiatry, his own mind a meticulously ordered library. Now, retired, the silence of his brownstone apartment was a stark contrast to the cacophony of voices he'd once catalogued. It was on a Tuesday, a day usually reserved for rereading Jung and contemplating the slow decay of his potted ferns, that the past decided to pay an unsolicited visit. His late wife, Clara, had always said he hoarded memories like a dragon hoarded gold. He found the box in the attic, tucked beneath a moth-eaten wedding dress and a collection of surprisingly sentimental holiday decorations. It was a simple, unassuming cardboard sarcophagus labeled Blackwood Sanatorium, Patient Archives, 1985-1995. The name alone sent a familiar chill down his spine, a phantom draft from a place he'd tried to forget. Blackwood. Even the syllables felt cold, heavy. It had been a place of last resort, a Gothic monolith perched on a windswept cliff, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at a perpetually grey sea. He'd been younger then, more idealistic, perhaps more naive. He'd believed every mind, no matter how fractured, held a path back to lucidity. Blackwood had challenged that belief, chipped away at it with every padded room, every distant scream swallowed by the stone walls. He hadn't intended to open the files. He'd told himself it was merely an act of decluttering, a final sweep before consigning these ghosts to the municipal incinerator. But the dust that puffed from the box carried a scent, stale paper, antiseptic, and something else, something metallic and unsettlingly familiar, like old blood or a forgotten fear. He selected a file at random, the name Eleanor Vance typed neatly on the tab. He remembered Eleanor, a fragile woman who believed birds carried messages from the dead. His notes were precise, his handwriting a familiar, slightly sloping script. He leafed through a few more. Arthur Grimshaw, paranoid delusions of being watched by entities in mirrors. Sarah Holloway, who spoke only in riddles. Each page was a testament to his meticulous nature, his clinical detachment. Then he saw it. A thicker file, its edges more worn than the others, as if handled, worried over, countless times. The label was stark, typed with a slightly misaligned P, Patient X, unidentified. Patient X. The designation itself was unusual. Blackwood, for all its grim reputation, had procedures. Unidentified patients were rare, temporary. This file, however, felt permanent. A cold curiosity, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at Alistair. He untied the rough twine binding it, the paper within yellowed and brittle at the edges. He opened it. The first page was a standard admission form, mostly blank. Date of admission, October 30th, 1992. Approximate age, indeterminate. Physical description, gaunt. Eyes of an unusual pale grey. Scars on forearms, self-inflicted. Then the clinical notes began, and Alistair's blood ran cold. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost calligraphic in its formation, but it wasn't his. He stared at the page, his own hand, now trembling slightly, hovering above the unfamiliar script. His memory, usually a fortress, felt suddenly porous. Had he suffered a lapse, a fugue state he couldn't recall? No, this wasn't a forgotten version of his own writing. This was alien. Every loop, every downstroke was meticulously different. He knew his own hand, the way a painter knows his signature brushstroke. This was an imposter. He flipped through the pages. Dates corresponded with a period he knew he'd been at Blackwood, a particularly grueling winter. The notes detailed sessions with patient X. They were disturbing, far more so than the usual melancholic ramblings or fragmented delusions he'd encountered. These notes spoke of a profound philosophical darkness, a chillingly articulate nihilism. Patient exhibits a profound understanding of existential despair, one entry read. Claims to see the scaffolding of reality, the rot beneath the surface of perceived order. Language is precise, almost poetic, yet laced with an undercurrent of profound menace. Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed one of his own authenticated files, Eleanor Vance, and laid it side by side with Patient X. The contrast was stark. His own notes, while clinical, had a certain rushed efficiency, the product of an overworked doctor. The notes in the Patient X file were elegant, deliberate, almost loving in their depiction of a fractured, terrifying psyche. Who had written this? Another doctor? But why would their notes be intermingled with his, under his archiving system? And why Patient X? Why the anonymity? Blackwood had its shadows, its hushed-up incidents. But this felt different. This felt invasive. He read further, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The entries became more personal, more unsettling. Patient X inquired about my own dreams today, showed an uncanny ability to discern my unspoken anxieties. I found myself disquieted, had to curtail the session. My unspoken anxieties. The pronoun was clear. The author of these notes was interacting with Patient X, but if it wasn't Alistair, then who? And why did reading it feel like deciphering a chillingly intimate confession? Sleep offered no escape that night. The unfamiliar handwriting danced behind Alistair's eyelids, the words of Patient X echoing in the hollow chambers of his mind. Blackwood. He hadn't thought of it in years, not truly. He'd buried it deep. But now it was exhuming itself. He remembered the oppressive atmosphere, the constant low thrum of human suffering. The staff, a mixture of weary veterans and bright-eyed idealists who quickly burned out. Dr. Albright, the stern, unyielding superintendent who ran Blackwood like a forgotten Victorian penal colony. Nurse Holloway, with her perpetually sad eyes and gentle hands, a beacon of kindness in a sea of despair. Could one of them have penned these notes? The next morning, fueled by black coffee and a gnawing unease, Alistair returned to the file. He focused on the dates. October 1992 through to January 1993. A grim, relentless winter. He remembered a flu outbreak that had swept through the sanatorium, staff and patients alike. He himself had been ill, bedridden for nearly a week. Could someone have covered his duties? It was plausible, but to take over a patient so completely, to document it with such strange intensity, and then for those notes to end up in his archived box, under his categorization, it was a stretch. He examined the paper itself. It was the standard cheap stock Blackwood used. The ink, however, he held it to the light, a deep, almost black indigo, different from the standard blue or black biro he and most of the staff had used. This ink was richer, more archaic, as if from a fountain pen. A fountain pen. It was a small detail, but it snagged in Alistair's mind. Who at Blackwood in the early 90s would have consistently used a fountain pen for patient notes? Dr. Albright, perhaps. He was old-fashioned enough, but Albright's own handwriting was a spidery, almost illegible scrawl, nothing like the elegant script in the Patient X file. The content of the notes grew increasingly bizarre. Patient X describes a symbiosis with the asylum itself, claims the building breathes, that its stone and mortar are infused with the collective despair of its inhabitants, spoke of whispers in the walls, not as a delusion, but as a literal phenomenon he could interpret. Alistair felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. This wasn't just a case file, it was a descent. The anonymous clinician was clearly becoming enmeshed, their professional detachment eroding with each entry. I find myself anticipating our sessions with a mixture of dread and a strange compulsion. Patient X's worldview is infectious, a beautiful, terrifying tapestry of nihilism. I caught myself looking for the rot today in the peeling paint of my office wall, in the tired eyes of Nurse Holloway. Nurse Holloway. The name again. She had been kind, yes, but also quiet, observant. She'd seen more than most. Could she have been the author? But the handwriting. It didn't seem to fit his memory of her hurried, slightly looping script on medication charts. The city sounds outside Alistair's window seemed to recede, replaced by the phantom howl of the Blackwood wind. He was no longer in his comfortable brownstone. He was back within those oppressive grey walls, the scent of antiseptic and despair clinging to him. The file was a portal, and he was falling through it. Days bled into a sleepless, obsessive haze. Alistair neglected his routines. His ferns drooped, untouched. The Patient X file became his singular focus. He cross-referenced dates with his old appointment diaries, meticulously kept even then. During the period of Patient X's admission and the subsequent note-taking, Alistair found entries confirming his workload was indeed lighter. A note: flu, severe, Dr. Ramsey covering rounds. Dr. Ramsey, a junior psychiatrist, new to Blackwood at the time, ambitious, a little aloof. Alistair vaguely recalled him. Could Ramsey have used a fountain pen? Could his handwriting have been so distinct? It was a possibility. But why would Ramsay's notes be in Alistair's personal archive? Why the anonymity? The final entries in the Patient X file were the most chilling. The elegant script became slightly more erratic, the ink blots larger as if the pen were being pressed too hard. Patient X claims he is not a patient, but a visitor. Says he chose Blackwood, chose me. Says we are kindred. I dismissed this, of course, and yet I find myself looking into the mirror and seeing not my own reflection, but a pale imitation of his gaunt face, his unsettlingly calm grey eyes. Alistair felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The author of the notes was not just observing madness, they were succumbing to it, or perhaps to something else entirely. The final entry was dated January 15th, 1993. He is gone. Patient X is gone. No record of discharge. No sign of escape. Vanished, as if he were never here. The room is empty. Only the silence remains. A silence that screams his name. Or perhaps it screams mine. After that, blank pages. Patient X had simply ceased to be. Alistair searched his own memory, trying to dredge up any recollection of a missing patient. An unexplained disappearance around that time. Nothing. A void. It was as if that entire period, the tenure of Patient X, had been surgically excised from his mind. He looked at his own hands. The slight tremor was more pronounced now. He thought of his meticulously ordered life, his carefully constructed sense of self. What if a part of it was a lie, a carefully constructed defense against a truth too terrible to acknowledge? He picked up a pen, one of his own familiar ballpoints, and a fresh sheet of paper. He tried to write his name, Dr. Alistair Finch. His hand shook, the letters clumsy, almost childish. He dropped the pen as if it had burned him. Then, an idea, cold and sharp, pierced through his fear. There was one other place he might find a sample of handwriting from that era, his own signature on official Blackwood documents, pay stubs, perhaps, or official memos stored in the same box. He rummaged frantically, papers flying. He found an old staff rota, dated December 1992. His name was there, listed for night duty, though he had no memory of it, and next to it, a barely legible initialing for a shift swap. Not his. And then he found it. A requisition form for medical supplies dated November 1992, signed at the bottom, not by him. The signature was elegant, precise, almost calligraphic. The signature read, Dr. A. Finch, but it wasn't his A. Finch. It was the same hand that had filled the Patient X file. Alistair stared at the requisition form, then at the Patient X file. The two scripts were identical. The truth, when it finally crashed upon him, was not a gentle wave, but a monstrous tsunami, obliterating the carefully constructed shoreline of his reality. There was no other doctor, no mysterious colleague. The handwriting in the Patient X file, the elegant, disturbed script detailing a descent into a shared madness. It was his. But how? He remembered his own handwriting, the slightly sloping, efficient script. This was an alien artifact, Unless memory itself was the forgery. He thought back to that winter of 92-93. The flu. He'd been ill, yes, terribly ill, delirious at times. Had he dissociated? Created another persona to cope with the horrors of Blackwood, with a patient so profoundly disturbing that his conscious mind couldn't bear the strain? The Patient X file. X, the unknown variable. Or perhaps the signature of a part of himself he had buried so deep it had become anonymous. He looked again at the final entry. He is gone. Patient X is gone. As if he were never here. Only the silence remains, a silence that screams his name. Or perhaps it screams mine. Patient X hadn't vanished. He had integrated. Or perhaps Alistair had become him for a time, and then, mercifully, forgotten. Sealed away that part of himself, that elegant, terrifying script, that profound understanding of the rot beneath everything. The box of Blackwood files suddenly felt like a Pandora's box he should never have opened. The dust wasn't just dust, it was the pulverized fragments of a shattered self. The other files, written in his familiar hand, were they real, or were they the careful constructions of a mind desperate to maintain an illusion of sanity? A mind that had once danced on the very precipice of the abyss and penned its observations in borrowed ink. He was Dr. Alistair Finch. He knew that. But who was the Alistair Finch who had written those notes? Who had looked into the eyes of Patient X and seen a kindred spirit? Who had felt the rot and for a time, perhaps even embraced it? The file lay open on his desk. The elegant handwriting seemed to mock him. It was a part of him, a dark, articulate, terrifying part he had successfully repressed for 30 years, until now. He slowly reached for a pen, not his usual ballpoint. From a dusty drawer, he retrieved an old fountain pen, a gift from his father he hadn't used in decades. He unscrewed the cap. The nib was cold against his fingers. He pulled a blank sheet of paper towards him. His hand, surprisingly, was steady now. He touched the nib to the paper, and he began to write. The script that flowed from the pen was not his familiar, rushed cursive. It was elegant, precise, almost calligraphic. And as he wrote, a single chilling question formed in his mind. A question that had no answer, only a terrifying, echoing silence. If this part of him had awakened, had Patient X returned as well, or had he perhaps never truly left? The mind is a palimpsest, layers of experience, written, erased, and written over again. Dr. Finch sought to catalogue the madness of others, only to discover a hidden chapter within himself, penned in an unfamiliar hand. What happens when the archivist becomes the artifact? When the lines between sanity and the abyss blur, not on a patient's chart, but within the psychiatrist's own soul? The Patient X file suggests that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Some echoes never fade. And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not those we encounter in the dark, but those who reside within us, patiently waiting for the ink to dry on their own unsettling narratives. If Dr. Finch's descent into the shadows of his own mind has left you unsettled, then you're in the right place. This is the Hauntline. We unearth the stories that linger in the dark, the whispers that refuse to be silenced. Don't miss an episode. Be sure to like this one if it sent a shiver down your spine. Subscribe to the Hauntline on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a journey into the unsettling. And please, tap that notification bell. You wouldn't want to be left alone in the dark when a new story drops. Share this episode with a friend who appreciates the cerebral and the chilling. Sometimes, the greatest comfort in fear is knowing you're not listening alone. Until next time, keep your lights on and question every familiar shadow. You never know what handwriting you might discover in the forgotten files of your own past.